When people ask what's the problem with the Minnesota Timberwolves, a team that made this all-in move by trading away their future for Rudy Gobert, a 30-year-old player on a max contract, so naturally the answer is, it's Rudy Gobert. He's the reason why the Timberwolves have underperformed relative to their expectations, a team that barely finished above 500 and with the 8th seed in the Western Conference. But as bad as that trade was, and I made a video on why that trade will ultimately go down as the worst trade in NBA history when all is said and done, what if I told you that the Timberwolves' biggest problem isn't actually Rudy Gobert? It's this guy, Karl-Antony Towns, their superstar big man who is supposed to be their franchise player, who they just gave a 4-year, $224 million supermax contract extension to that will pay him all the way through 2028, at which point he'll be making $61 million in that final season when he's 32 years old. And while most will disagree that Cat is the Timberwolves' main problem and not Rudy Gobert, let me explain why, and I'll let you be the judge in the comments. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a video, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, when the Minnesota Timberwolves were awarded the #1 pick in 2015, as the NBA draft neared, it was becoming more and more clear that Karl-Antony Towns was going to be going #1 overall. Yes, the #1 high school recruit in Jahlil Okafor was seen to be the favorite #1 pick for that draft for most of that season, but his stock started falling a bit after the draft combine, and when the Wolves were fortunate enough to land what appeared to be a future superstar big man that could dominate in the paint with his ability to score and crash the boards and also shoot it from outside, which was becoming more critical in an NBA that was evolving to a three-point shooting league after the Warriors had just won their first championship in 2015, utilizing the three ball as their main offensive weapon. Karl-Antony Towns had all the tools to put the Timberwolves on the map and bringing the small market franchise to relevancy, a team that at that time was on one of the longest playoff droughts in the NBA. And right away, Cat was looking to be the player that the Wolves thought that he would be for their future, winning Rookie of the Year, rising to stardom in his sophomore season, putting up over 25 points per game and 12 rebounds, to securing his first All-Star selection and All-NBA selection in just his third season at the age of 22. Cat quickly started to become a more efficient and lethal outside shooter, going from shooting 34% from deep on 1.1 attempts per game in his rookie year to shooting over 40% on near 8 attempts per game. Cat was rising to being one of the best shooting big men in the NBA while also being one of the best rebounders in the game. But while Cat's skills continued to improve, the Timberwolves weren't really getting much better, even despite the fact that they added one of the best young scorers in the game with the #1 pick in Anthony Edwards. And before that, the year the Timberwolves finally did make the playoffs in 2018 after adding Jimmy Butler, the Wolves lost that series in 5 games, and a disgruntled Jimmy Butler forced his way out of Minnesota, citing that the guys on the team were just too soft, and even went on to berate the players and coaches in training camp this season after that playoff series. Jimmy Butler was and is one of the fiercest competitors in the NBA, and he took a look around at that roster after playing with them after just 1 season and said, yeah, this team isn't it, and he forced his way out. Now, while you can blame the front office, both the present and past regimes, for the multiple blunders and decisions they have made during their tenures, because at the end of the day, the front office constructs the teams, and it's their job to put the right personnel in place to help the team win. And while Karl-Antony Towns is certainly no scrub and is still one of the best big men in the NBA, you cannot deny, though, that Karl-Antony Towns has continued to underperform and even in some cases become a non-factor in the biggest moments for this team. Take the first play-in as an example for the Wolves. They faced off against the LA Lakers for the 7th seed. The Wolves were without Rudy Gobert, who the team suspended after he punched his own teammate on the bench in Ryan Anderson. This was Karl-Antony Towns' time to shine. And when you look at his stat line, it looks like he played incredible. 24 points, 8 for 12 shooting, 11 rebounds, 5 assists, and 3 blocks, a plus 18 on the night. If anything, this game should have been on Anthony Edwards, who played so poorly in one of the worst games of his career and cost the Wolves the 7th seed. Or did he? You see, the Wolves had this game, a win in their grasp, with a solid lead going into the 4th quarter and maintaining that lead into the final minutes. But then the Lakers started turning it on. LeBron James and Anthony Edwards started turning it up a notch. And who did they go at? Karl-Antony Towns. The Lakers knew they weren't going to win from behind the arc. In fact, they shot 10 for 31 from 3 on that night and barely took 3s in the 4th quarter. So instead, they decided to go inside and expose the Wolves' biggest weakness without Rudy Gobert. On the other end, Cat was also incredibly deferential, not taking the ball inside, not being aggressive and getting to the hoop. Instead, he was chucking up long twos or giving it up to Anthony Edwards, who was ice cold and couldn't hit a bucket to save his life that night. Your franchise player passing up the ball and being unwilling to post up or taking it inside in a critical game for which you have the ability to lock up the 7 seed and go up against a team that presents a much better matchup in the Memphis Grizzlies than a team like the Denver Nuggets. Instead, the Wolves fall off, scoring just 16 points in the fourth quarter and overtime combined. Now here's the thing, no one is denying that going all in on Rudy Gobert was a huge mistake. When you trade 5 first-round picks as well as a quality young player in Jared Vanderbilt for Rudy Gobert, a 30-year-old who still has 4 years left on his max contract, that's a franchise-altering mistake that will set you back for years. And while Gobert has been nothing short of disappointing in not being the Defensive Player of the Year caliber player he was when he was on the Jazz, at the same time though, Rudy Gobert is not this team's franchise player, even though the amount they traded for him begs to differ. But Gobert is not supposed to be that guy that leads this team to a title run. He's not even the second option. No, Karl-Antony Towns in tandem with Anthony Edwards is supposed to be that guy. You're 1A player on a team that had the expectations to contend. Now, of course, Cat missed a good portion of the season, and that obviously impacted the Wolves' overall success and their underwhelming record this year. But for Cat, it goes back to the big moments and being incredibly passive, or some would say soft, in these big moments. The play-in was just one example, but in this series against the Nuggets, he's been especially bad. It's not even just the fact that he's been inefficient, shooting 43% from the field, 27% from 3, or also shooting 73% from the free throw line. It's the fact that his defense has been non-existent and a liability for the Wolves, that the Nuggets are straight exposing that part of his game as a massive weakness for the Timberwolves, not being able to do anything to stop Jokic, Aaron Gordon, or Michael Porter Jr. They're going at Karl-Antony Towns, and there's nothing he can do about it. Now, don't get me wrong, Cat's defense has never really been good. It's always been a hole in his game, and it's why they brought in someone like Rudy Gobert to complement his lack of defense. And really, you have those two complementing each other's weaknesses by Cat focusing on offense and Gobert on defense. And to be fair, Gobert has not shown up well on the defensive end in this series, similar to what we saw from him in the Jazz in the postseason, which is why the Jazz ultimately decided to move on from Gobert. So Gobert is to blame for the Wolves' overall underwhelming season, as well as how they have been showing up as a group in this series with how soft he has been in protecting the rim, and also getting outplayed by Jokic on most possessions. But for Karl-Antony Towns, it's the complete lack of effort and strength on defense that has been particularly troubling. And he hasn't even been that good on offense, not being aggressive and actually getting inside, drawing contact, passing up on threes even when he's open. Cat had 9 shot attempts, 9 shots in Game 4 against the Nuggets, a game that went into overtime in an elimination game, which the Wolves almost blew by allowing the Nuggets to go on a 12-0 run to close out regulation. And Karl-Antony Towns got bailed out after fouling Jokic and sending him to the line to go ahead in that game, but was saved from Jokic missing the first free throw and ending the game with a tie. And then obviously Anthony Edwards went off in overtime to have the Wolves survive for another day. Cat didn't take a single shot in the overtime period. Anthony Edwards is a baller. Dude is a stud and a star in the making. But this is supposed to be Cat's team. And for the most part, he's been a non-factor in this series as their leader. Not aggressive enough, too soft on both ends of the floor, crumbling under pressure, and not being that superstar that you need to take over games. I know this is probably obvious for anybody who follows basketball, but Anthony Edwards shows way more potential of being this team's franchise player than someone like Karl-Antony Towns. Because even with Cat being 27 in his prime, he still struggles with the same things he has for the past 4 or 5 seasons. He hasn't taken his game to the next level of being a bona fide superstar, despite the fact that he's getting paid like one. And you have to think, if you're a Wolves fan, has Cat hit his ceiling? Have we seen the best of Karl-Antony Towns, and now we're locked into this guy for the next 5 seasons? Again, still a great player, still one of the best bigs in the league, but he's not going to be that number 1 option on a title contending team, and it's going to be incredibly challenging to be able to move him in a trade now with that contract. And yes, while some of this is the fact that Rudy Gobert just doesn't fit well with this roster, more specifically with Cat because he clogs up the paint and it doesn't enable Cat to get clean looks outside when Gobert is unable to space the floor. And obviously it limits Cat's ability to operate in the post when Gobert is just hanging around the paint. But that still shouldn't excuse Cat from playing very poor defense, nor should it excuse his poor efficiency and reduced impact on the court. Not when you're getting paid as a super max player and a leader for this team. You have to be more assertive than that in being the go-to guy when on the court down the stretch. And he just hasn't been that. And if you're the Wolves, as big of a problem as it is in trading your future for Gobert and being locked into his contract, being tied up with Karl-Antony Towns for the next 5 seasons on a super max deal might actually be a bigger issue. Let Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.